You'll see and hear someone saying the way out of unemployment is for young people to create a business, which means creating your own job, creating jobs for other people. But for so many people, the biggest problem is often getting start-up capital. Vusi Thembekwayo is an entrepreneur and public speaker. He joins me now. Vusi, good afternoon to you. Thanks for your time this Youth Day. If it was so easy to start a business, right, everyone would start one. I don't have one, and yet we don't all see that. How easy is it really to start a new business?
It's not. It's the single most difficult thing you can try to do. It's an incredibly difficult thing. And I do think that South Africa's government has actually been quite mischievous, Stephen, because what the South African government has done is it has failed to build a macro economy that is inclusive and growing, and then has outsourced the responsibility of creating economic opportunities to young people by saying to them, start a business. The truth is, in any other part of the world, starting a business is a last resort. It's not a first resort. So you start about getting an education, you get a job, you acquire a skill, you have some savings, and then you start a business. In South Africa, you're given a subpar education with very little job opportunities, an economy that's not growing, structures of the economy that are exclusive to very big businesses, and then you're expected to miraculously start this business without any seed funding. It's mischievous, if not criminal.
I was going to ask about that, because young people, right, I mean, sort of make the point that sometimes our society seems almost structurally biased against young people. And that's because old people, people with hair that looks a little like mine, are actually insiders in the economy. If you're young, you're almost automatically an outsider. Education makes you more of an outsider still.
100%. And it's the tragedy is it's actually not a South Africanism. It's an Africanism. We live in a continent that is incredibly ageist. So unless you are a person of a particular age and a particular gender with a particular connection to a particular group of people, even in countries as far as Uganda and Kenya, Rwanda, Nigeria, all the way north to Morocco and Egypt, you're going to find exactly the same things there too. So the irony is that for one day in a year, 24 hours in a 365-day cycle, authorities would have us believe that they care about the agenda of young people. But you must ask the question, bar that day and the marches, and of course there are none this year because of the coronavirus, and the gatherings and the speeches, what is there substantively to suggest that there actually is an agenda for young people? It's pretty clear that there isn't. And whilst there are agencies that have been created to work for young people, all of them seem to lack a coordination with the state government. They seem to lack a cordiality in terms of how they relate with young people. But most importantly, Stephen, I think they lack equity. I think many young people just don't take those institutions seriously. And as a function of that, they exist for themselves and not for the young people for whom they purport to exist.
I mean, there's a political question here, right? If you look at our voting figures from 1994, and I mean, this happens with countries that get freedom. In the first election, everybody votes, and then the numbers start to drop, and the older a democracy, often the fewer people vote, unless there's something interesting. You know, Barack Obama was interesting 12 years ago, Donald Trump, not so much. So what you have, right, is that we're seeing our young people pulling out of formal politics. And by that I mean they don't vote. We have the structures, we have the ANC Youth League, we have, you know, this youth brigade. The EFF is obviously has a large number of young supporters. But as people are pulling out of formal politics, what does that tell us? They're pulling out of formal society. They're pulling out of all of the structures in some way.
Well, the truth is this, that they're pulling out of formal politics because they're not included in any other part of our formal society. They're not included in the economy. Many of them are not tax-paying citizens. They don't enjoy the social welfare of our country, not to its fullest extent. And they're also not included in the best quality of education that our country has to offer. You have to understand that things like education and healthcare in this country have been privatized for the minority who can afford to access them. For everybody else, you play your odds at the quality of the principal at the local public school. Those are the realities. So when we're asking young people to show up at the ballot, the idea is that they have some sort of equity in our society. The truth is, they don't. And young people, in my mind, are right to sit on the sidelines and go, well, I'm not going to participate in this system. Because even those of us, myself included, who've had the opportunities and the privilege to carve out a niche in some sort of environment, even we continue to face those very ageist arguments around this readiness to lead nonsense. It's funny to me that today we're celebrating Hector Peterson, who passed at a he was, you know, near on toddler at the age at which he died. And the people who today would have you and I believe we're not ready to lead as young people were his age when they were arguing for the things around change and leadership that we're asking for today. So this idea that young people have to wait their turn, or young people are not yet wise enough, or young people are not yet mature enough, is nonsense and fallacious. It's not the role of young people to be wise and mature. It's the role of young people to agitate, and it's the role of society to create spaces for those young people to agitate. Its failure to do so creates, as it has done in South Africa, a political party that will exercise, and exploit the fallow capacity that lies within the youth brigade.
It's so interesting when we talk about, for example, youth unemployment, 58% according to the latest stats from Statistics South Africa. I mean, it's the most terrifying figure imaginable, right? And that half of our young people don't have jobs, and the number before that was 56%. This is a structural problem. Once or twice I've had conversations, I'm not going to say with young people, they don't have a mandate, young people are very diverse, but one or two people have said to me, it's my fault, I'm a failure. My generation has failed. And I have to tell you, I stayed awake that night because I kept thinking, it's not your fault, not their fault. Like, these are people who, in my view at least, have been structurally discriminated against in a kind of, like, terrible way.
I mean, here is the truth of it. This is the truth of it. The people who are in power today, the generation that leads us today, so imagine 58 and above, say. This is 58 to 78, say. And I'm being generous here, because the truth is, if you look at our parliament, that's not the median. But let's imagine that it is. How many of the people in that generation who are of my skin color have built anything that has created economic opportunities for young people? Don't worry, I'll wait. And so the idea that young people haven't created anything for themselves is not only a fallacious argument, but it's completely devoid of the facts. It's not for young people to build anything for themselves, it's for society to create those opportunities. What is for young people to do is to make sure that they are equal to the opportunity when it arises, is to make sure that they are skilled, is to make sure that they are competent and capable, and is to make sure that they have agency. That's what our role is. But how do you and how do I as a young person today, 35 years old, go and start a bank? To start an insurance company in this country, you need a 10 million rand deposit in the bank just to get the application form. You need an additional 100 million rand just to submit that application form. How many 35-year-old young people do you know of any skin color who've got 150 million rand lying fallow to start some project called an insurance company? So the truth of it is that we do live in a country that is structurally exclusive, and say whatever you will about the Afrikaners. But in the main, what they have done is they have built structures and economies for the Afrikaner youth and the Afrikaner community. And they have done so by building businesses that have seeded new businesses. So look at Naspers today. Go look at the Naspers Foundry, which is the venture capital of Naspers. And look at the businesses that the Naspers Foundry have funded and who runs those businesses. Because there is an understanding in that community that the role of the generation in power is to seed opportunities to the generation that is forthcoming. And that's not what's happening, certainly not by government, certainly not by the state, and I hasten to say, not even by many of the DFIs. It's unfortunate because at the end of the day, they're creating a systemic problem which we're all going to have to live into.
All right, let's talk a little bit about nuts and bolts and businesses. I mean, every person who started a business I've spoken to, and I've said to them, what's the biggest problem that you had? It always boils down to the same thing, startup capital, right? Which is why, right, to use your phrase, it's people who look like me who are often able to start up businesses because they can tap dad or they can tap whoever because they've got middle class wealth, been in the middle class for a long time. Startup capital is the biggest thing. There are banks that you can borrow from, there's this you can borrow from, all of that comes with strings attached. At the same time, young people are taught entrepreneurship in schools. It would seem, in a way, you're now being told that if you can't do it, you didn't study properly. That doesn't make sense. It's all about startup capital.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at and there's a lot of empirical evidence and research to talk about what is the mix that you require really to build a business. So capital is important. I would hasten to say it's critical. Without it, you can't really get off the starting blocks. But absent of capital, you need the right skills. Next to that, you need the market opportunity. What they use is market access, the ability to go somewhere and sell your goods and services. Now, let's think about the average young black person between the ages of 18 and 35 who went to a township school in a township somewhere. They've not yet been employed, so they don't have any savings. That means they don't have any money with which to start a business. They come from a township. That means the bank don't recognize the assets their parents have as an asset that they can securitize to issue them a loan. So they can't access formal credit that way either. Then they go see a government department which says to them, for us to give you capital, they need to do a business plan. But I've just said to you, they went to a public school which graduated them with a 33% pass in math literacy. Then we say the young people aren't taking initiative. It's not that the young people aren't taking initiative. The system is not only failing them, but the system is not holding itself accountable. The tragedy, I think, for many of us young people, and this is where we need to take ownership, is we consistently and perpetually vote in the people who perpetuate this very same system.